Yo, what is going on, guys? Jaeky here. Today I'm going to be showing you guys my Valorant settings updated for 2023. I'm going to be going over my in-game settings, my monitor settings, NVIDIA settings, as well as my mouse and keyboard settings. So yeah, these are the settings that I hit Radiant with, and let's get right into it. Okay, so starting off with the General tab, my in-game Valorant settings. For enemy highlight color, I play on yellow. I've tried all of these, but at the end of the day, I prefer yellow, and that's what I've been using for the longest time now. For sensitivity, I play on 0.28 at 800 DPI. I've been trying not to change this, but if I do change my sensitivity, you can always stay updated with it on my Twitch page. You can just type sensitivity or sends in my chat, exclamation point sensitivity or exclamation point sends in my chat, and it will give you the updated sensitivity that I'm on. For scope sensitivity multiplier, I play on 1. This is just how I've played ever since beta, just 1 on both ADS and scoped. I don't use inverse mouse, obviously, and then for raw input buffer, I turn this on. If you guys want to know what this does, you can just give it a quick Google. But for most people, it's recommended that you turn raw input buffer on just to reduce input lag. These are my minimap settings, and again, I haven't changed this in a very long time. In my opinion, this is some of the best minimap settings that you can have. The most important thing is you want to turn keep players centered off, because if you have this off, you'll get a lot more information on your minimap compared to having it on. So I would always recommend to turn keep players centered off. Rotate I have on, minimap size I keep at 1, and then minimap zoom I put on 0.09. Going down to these settings, these are mostly personal preference. I play on right hand view model, and then I also turn mature content off, which is just corpses and blood. I turn both of these off because I find it less clutter, and I also prefer the sparks over the blood. Sometimes I feel like I see the sparks better. That's why I have mature content off. Show bullet tracers I keep on, that's just default. And everything else here is personal preference. I do turn off show spectator count because I think it's a little bit annoying to see how many people are spectating you. And that's pretty much it for the general tab. Going over to the controls, I keep basically all of the abilities default. And then I really only change a couple things like the jump. I do a secondary bind and I jump with mouse wheel down just because I'm used to that. And now under equipment for aim down sights and sniper rifle aim, I use toggle for both of these. It's really just personal preference, but I prefer using toggle. And then operator zoom, I also do toggle. I don't really feel a need for the double scope, so that's why I do toggle. And then operator zoom, this is also on toggle. Auto re-enter scope, I have this on. And then scrolling down, in my opinion, this is really important to turn on, is the auto equip prioritize, as well as the don't auto equip melee. You want to check don't auto equip melee, and then you also want to change the auto equip prioritize to strongest. This will make sure that if you're tapping the spike or you're defusing and you decide to get off to take a gunfight, it won't pull out your classic or it won't pull out your knife. Instead, it will pull out your main gun. And so this is really important. And also after using abilities, like if you're breach flashing, it will pull out your main gun. So this is pretty important to turn on. And then going down, I think something a little bit different is I changed the spray key to Z, and then I changed the ping to T. I think by default these are swapped, but it's really just a personal preference thing. And then for my push to talk, I use V for in-game, and then I use, for party, I use my side mouse button. Everything else is, I think, default. Okay, as for my crosshairs, I will leave a link to my tracker profile in the crosshair section. I keep that updated all the time with crosshairs that I'm using. There's really only 4 main crosshairs that I use. Again, you can just follow the link in the description if you want the codes. So my main 4 is the 1422, this outline crosshair, 1420, and the dot are really the only 4 crosshairs that I use, and the main one being 1420. Moving on to the video tab under general, always make sure you play on full screen for the least amount of input lag. I play on native resolution. Stretched is really just placebo, so I don't do stretched at all. And then scrolling down, I cap my FPS at 300 because 300 FPS is more than enough, and that's what I did in CSGO as well. And if you have it, always make sure you turn NVIDIA Reflex Low Latency on plus boost. This will basically reduce your input lag, which I go over in my input lag reduction video. If you haven't watched that, I highly recommend checking it out. I will also leave a link to that in the description below. Moving on to the graphics quality tab. This is all of my graphics quality settings. I pretty much have everything up here on low. If you have multi-threaded rendering, I highly recommend you turn that on. Anti-aliasing, I use MSAA 2X because it makes the edges of maps a little bit sharper, and I prefer that, or not sharper, but smoother, so it's not as jagged, and I prefer looking at it that way. Also, anisotropic filtering, I put this on 4x. This basically just makes your skins look better. So I'll put up a little picture on the screen right now of 1x compared to 4x. You can see in my Phantom skin that on 1x it just looks horrible, but on 4x the Phantom skin actually looks pretty good. So this basically just makes skins look better, and as a content creator, I prefer having my skins look good. Also, these two settings don't really dip FPS that much if you're on a decent computer. So if you're on a decent computer and you don't need like the extra 10 FPS, then I would recommend turning these on just to make your game look a little bit better. Everything under here I turn off. Some people do like playing with bloom. It makes Sova darts a little bit easier to spot, but I don't really feel a need for it, so I turn everything here off. And then moving on to stats, this is a personal preference obviously on what you want to see, but the only thing I feel a need for is FPS and network, which is your ping, and I just put that on text only. Moving on to audio settings, these are obviously all personal preference, but I would recommend you turn on HRTF. It will help you in the long term with pinpointing footsteps and making the game sound a lot more accurate in terms of directional audio. I would recommend turning HRTF on and getting used to that. And obviously voice chat and voiceover is all personal preference. And yeah, that's pretty much all of my in-game settings. Now let's move on to my NVIDIA settings. Okay, moving on to my NVIDIA control panel settings. To access it, you just right click on your desktop, show more options, NVIDIA control panel. I used to actually play around a lot with my NVIDIA 3D settings, but nowadays I just leave it default. So literally I just leave it on let the 3D application decide, and there's really no difference whatsoever that I've noticed. I used to like go in here and tune every single one of these, but I just turn it on let 3D application decide. And also for the low latency mode inside of here, you don't need to touch this. If you turn on the NVIDIA Reflex in-game onto on plus boost, like I mentioned earlier, that will actually override this setting. I just leave this all default on let the 3D application decide. And if you have messed around with this and you want to actually just reset it, you just have to click restore defaults and it will just go back to this. For my color settings, I don't touch any of this at all because like my digital vibrance and gamma and stuff, I change all of that on my monitor. So everything inside of NVIDIA control panel, I leave just completely default. Okay, two things that I forgot to mention earlier. Number one is disabling enhanced pointer precision. To do this, you want to go into the control panel, go mouse, and then go to pointer options and uncheck enhanced pointer precision and click apply. This doesn't really do anything for Valorant because Valorant uses raw input, but better safe than sorry, so make sure this is turned off. Alright, next thing is you definitely don't want to be part of those horror stories where people unbox a high refresh rate monitor and then forget to set it to high refresh rate. Most monitors, when you plug them in, will not be at their max refresh rate, and you actually have to set it. So if you bought a 144 Hz refresh rate monitor or just a high refresh rate monitor, chances are you may not have set it to high refresh rate. So what you need to do is right click on your desktop, go to display settings, and then scroll down until you see advanced display. Click on that, and then under here it will say choose a refresh rate. You just want to click on this and make sure that it's set to the highest possible. After that, you just click apply if it asks you to apply, and that's it. All right, moving on to my keyboard settings. I go over all of this and my reasoning for it in my Wooting 60HE review video, which I'll also leave in the description below. But I'm not going to bother explaining everything in this video. I'll leave a code to this Wooting profile in case you have a Wooting 60HE and you want my settings. But these are basically all of my settings for it, and I'll leave a code in the description as well. Okay, so moving on to my mouse settings, I use a G Pro Superlight, and if you do use a G Pro Superlight, I highly recommend not installing Logitech G Hub unless you absolutely need it for any other like Logitech gear that you have. But if you're only using the G Pro Superlight, I highly recommend using the Logitech onboard memory manager. If you search Logitech OMM, it'll just be the first link right here. And this is basically what all the pros use on LAN for their mice. It's basically not a software, but just a little program that you download one time and you run it. And then you can set your DPI and your polling rate and save it onto your mouse on the onboard memory. That way you don't have to download any bloatware onto your computer. You can just use the onboard memory manager instead of going through Logitech G Hub. So for my G Pro Superlight, I use 800 DPI with 1000 polling rate. And then I just save it onto my mouse. You can just close out of it and then just never touch it again. Okay, so all of my gear is on the screen right now. And if any of this changes, I always keep it updated on my Twitch page. So you can go over there, look at my panels, or just type a command if you want to know what specific gear I'm using. But now I'm going to be moving on to my monitor settings. I'm using the BenQ Zowie XL2546. So these are all of my settings for that. And keep in mind, these are my settings for Valorant. For regular desktop use, they're a little bit different. But for when I'm playing Valorant, these are my monitor settings. And finally, guys, as a side note, I don't use raw Excel or angle snapping. Raw Excel might be okay to experiment with. But for angle snapping, I highly recommend that you guys do not use angle snapping. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Those were all of my updated Valorant settings that got me to Radiant. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.